Reach down and run my fingers through the sand, only to wake the memory of your hand. But now everything is empty. I wish these waves would take me, 'cause I can still feel your heart beating with mine. You said you never leave me on the night. I watched the cars collide. You left me here fighting to survive. It's over tonight. Thought we had the rest of our lives. I should never say goodbye. It's all a lie. It's over tonight. Was brighter standing in your sun. Our love was so warm beneath my skin. This ring meant forever, but forever turned to never. Over and over, I can't take this again. You said you never leave me on the night. I watched the cars collide. You left me here fighting to survive. It's over tonight. Thought we had the rest of our lives. I should never say goodbye. It's all a lie. It's over tonight. I need your love. I need your love. Am I all alone? Just speak to me, speak to me. I need your love. I need your love. Am I all alone? Just speak to me, speak to me. Lead to me, say that I can stop these I need your love. Am I all alone? Just speak to me, speak to me. I need your love. I need your love. Am I all alone? Just speak to me, to me.
See, this is exactly why I need somebody in the chat to tell me stuff like this, because I am not professional yet. Appreciate that, Fistio Doyle. Welcome to Might Be Wrong. I am going to talk about the conflict between Ukraine and Russia today. We're going to do kind of I want to say brief. I'd like to quickly try and do an overview of NATO from when it started all the way through, and I'm gonna just try to flow real well and go through stuff. One of the things I did last time was I was reading too much, so I'm gonna try to go off bullet points, not have to read too much, and we'll see how it goes. All right, so we're gonna start with NATO itself. I'm gonna switch here, and so in 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was founded. It was created by the United States, Canada, and several Western European nations. And the purpose was to provide collective security against the Soviet Union. And they also claimed that it was also in order to provide economic stability and to help direct that area more towards a democratic way of living. So, all right, I see you there, bud. So in 1955 came about the Warsaw Pact, and I'm going to jump over here. I eventually will put all the links for all the sources I'm going to use today. I'm going to put them in the description so you'll be able to look them up on your own. There is a lot of them, but I just wanted to, if anybody has questions about anything I'm going to cover, you'll be able to click and figure out for yourself where I got that information from and what I'm talking about. So, 1955 saw the Warsaw Pact. Just a few years after NATO was formed, the Warsaw Pact was a response to NATO to unify the Eastern European countries with the Soviets. And in 1956, NATO adopted the strategic doctrine of massive retaliation. And what massive retaliation is the idea that they would use nuclear force in response to any attack on a NATO country. And the claim was that this was going to achieve two goals. One, that it would achieve the goal of deterring any attacks because they'd already stated in advance that the response was going to be nuclear. And then the other thing that it would do is it would allow, especially the poorer nations that were in NATO, to focus on their economic recovery and their the economic well-being of their country, as opposed to beefing up their military, spending a lot of money on their military. Instead of having to worry about having to have more ground troops and, artillery and tanks and things like this, they could invest in their country and, healthcare and all the things that you can focus on if you've got somebody else worried about your defense. So that was the idea behind it. Kind of interesting where if you fast forward, this is one of the biggest frustrations that Donald Trump had, was that when you look at the NATO countries, we really were the only ones that were contributing to financially to defense the way that it was required. And if you think about it, it could be traced all the way back to 1956, where we kind of put that out there, that if we had this massive retaliation, you wouldn't have to worry about having small military defense. So that massive retaliation, keep that in mind, that's still technically to this day, where what we've said is any attack on a NATO country is an attack on every NATO country, and the response can be nuclear. All right, so 1961, we have the Berlin Wall, which I'm sure everyone's aware of. Berlin Wall, north and south across Germany. I'm going to go ahead and switch so you guys can see Germany. This should be able to pick up on the screen. Yeah. So Berlin is somewhere right about in here. So East and West Germany. Obviously, you can see West Germany is massive, okay? And East Germany is very small. And the wall was here, separating East Germany from West Germany. And that wall separated the Soviets from the Allies, okay? Soviets basically from NATO at the time. And just to kind of set up how the U.S. would react in a similar situation to what Russia is going through right now, we're going to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because the Cuban Missile Crisis happened only about a year after the Berlin Wall was put up. And for those that don't know, I'll just cover it very briefly. We had a spy plane flying over Cuba, and it took pictures and got photographs of nuclear missile sites that were being built up by the Soviet Union on Cuba. And so JFK, trying to avoid a nuclear war, kind of took a risk, and he put up a naval blockade around Cuba, and he called it a quarantine, and it was to prevent any of the Soviets from bringing in more military supplies. And then he demanded of the Soviet Union that they get rid of all of the nuclear weapons, everything in that facility. The Soviet leader at that time was Nikita Khrushchev, and Khrushchev complied, and the agreement was that they would destroy the nuclear program, and we agreed not to invade Cuba, and then we also agreed to remove our nuclear weapons that we had put in Turkey, which, once again, just because I know not everybody's great with geography, we had nuclear weapons in Turkey, okay? Here's Russia. Here's the Soviet Union, basically. And here's Turkey. And we had nuclear weapons in Turkey. We agreed to remove those as part of our agreement with Russia to not put nuclear weapons in Cuba. Of course, that was kept secret, and it was not released until 25 years later. So that was not public knowledge at the time that we had nuclear weapons in Turkey and that we agreed to get rid of them. One of the things I find interesting, you'll have people that say things like, why do we have to make an agreement with Khrushchev that we're not going to invade Cuba? Why in the world would we invade Cuba? Who would suggest such a ridiculous thing? But for those in my circles, you're probably aware of this, but we'll just talk very briefly about Operation Northwoods. So Operation Northwoods was actually in 1961, and what happened was there was a plan. I'll kind of read this article a little bit because it might do a better job than me. So in the early 1960s, it was in 1961, America's top military leaders reportedly drafted plans to kill innocent people and commit acts of terrorism in U.S. cities to create public support for a war against Cuba. So the president's advisors and top military personnel wanted to take Cuba for America. And so this codenamed Operation Northwoods, the plans reportedly included the possible assassination of Cuban immigrants, sinking boats of Cuban refugees on the high seas, hijacking planes, blowing up a U.S. ship, and even orchestrating violent terrorism in U.S. cities. The plans were developed as a way to trick the American public and the international community into supporting a war to oust Cuba's then new leader, Communist Fidel Castro. And America's top military brass even contemplated causing U.S. military casualties, writing, quote, "We could blow up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame Cuba," end quote. and, quote, casualty lists in U.S. newspapers would cause a helpful wave of national indignation, end quote. And so I bring this up for two reasons. One, because I think it's important for us to realize that us invading Cuba actually was a real threat. So Khrushchev was not wrong in requiring that guarantee from us in exchange for him removing weaponry. And two, I think it's also important for us to realize that our government is very immoral, and they will do some of the most terrible things in order to get what they want. And the levels that they will sink to with their propaganda is pretty insane. And I think it is very healthy of us to realize that. That they literally put a plan together, and it made it all the way to Kennedy's desk. And, of course, Kennedy shot it down. And the reason Kennedy shot it down is he said he didn't want to risk nuclear war. That is the reason Kennedy shot it down. Not because it would be beyond reason to kill Americans and it would be terrible to propagandize Americans and all this. No, he didn't want to do it because he did not want to risk a nuclear war. So this is the way we react when we have missiles 93 miles from our border, 1,100 miles from our capital, is we stop the movement of those weapons and we threaten war. That's what we do. And then we came to a peaceful resolution in that situation. But that is what we do when a neighboring country of ours is given weapons by our enemy. All right. Now, we're going to go back to this history of NATO section. So, in 1979, first of all, there's plenty of things that happened between 1962 and 1979, but the primary thing we should be aware of is between 62 and 79, we basically went from defense to détente. We went out of our way to de-escalate the situation, and part of that was because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. That situation really caused the American military, and at least the president at the time, to kind of take a breath and say, okay, we need to not be as aggressive with this military action. We need to actually promote peace instead of constantly threatening war. So we basically had a détente from 1962 to 1979. There were things that happened, but they're not that important for this video. In 1979, the Cold War is restarted with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And then in 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev signed the INF Treaty, and that treaty was... Oh, wait a minute. No, 85, Mikhail Gorbachev took power, and then in 87, he signed the INF Treaty, which at the time, it was kind of like a sign that we were coming to an end of the Cold War, because it was a sign of weakness. The INF Treaty basically made it to where there were no short-range nuclear weapons allowed to be fired. We had a ceasefire of anything like that. We just made sure they were never fired to begin with, but we agreed that neither one of us would do any of that. And so then in 87, right, we signed that treaty. Member countries of the Warsaw Pact really couldn't afford to continue. And that's why the war was coming. The Cold War was coming to an end, because at the time, the Soviet Union was spending about 3 times what the United States government was, and the Soviet Union economically was a complete joke. And the same reason why those countries were falling apart in the Warsaw Pact was because they economically couldn't keep up. Communism cannot keep up with capitalism, and if you're trying to fight these wars, they're very expensive. So basically, communism, their own economic position was their own downfall as far as trying to expand their empire. 1989, the Berlin Wall was taken down. I don't know how many of y'all are old enough to remember that, but I remember that. I was a kid, and my parents had gone back to college, and one of the young men that was in college with my parents actually was in the reserves, and he actually went over to Germany and helped in taking down the Berlin Wall, which was pretty cool. He came back with like pieces of the wall, and so I got to hold chunks of the Berlin Wall as a 9-year-old, which was pretty cool. So after the Berlin Wall comes down, we're going to go over here. These are declassified documents from multiple countries, okay? And from basically 1990 through 1991, we have leaders of NATO member nations. And what they're doing is they're going out of their way to convince Mikhail Gorbachev that if he dissolve the Soviet Union, that NATO would not extend eastward. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys. Right here, it says U.S. Secretary of State. This is probably the most reading we're going to do is in this document here. U.S. Secretary of State James Baker's famous "not 1 inch eastward," not 1 inch eastward, he tells Mikhail Gorbachev on February 9th, 1990. And it was part of a cascade of assurances about Soviet security given by Western leaders to Gorbachev and other Soviet officials throughout the process of German unification in 1990 and on into 1991, according to declassified U.S., Soviet, German, British, and French documents posted today by the National Security Archive at George Washington University. This archive is from 2017. But the documents show multiple leaders were considering and rejecting Central and Eastern European membership in NATO as of early 1990 and through 91. Discussions of NATO in the context of German unification negotiations in 1990 were not at all narrowly limited to the status of East German territory, and that subsequent Soviet and Russian complaints about being misled about NATO expansion were founded in written contemporaneous memcoms and telcons at the highest levels. Okay? So, let's see here. We have George H.W. Bush had assured Gorbachev during the Malta summit in December 1989 that the U.S. would not take advantage of the revolutions in Eastern Europe to harm Soviet interests. But neither Bush nor Gorbachev at that point, or for that matter, West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, expected so soon the collapse of East Germany or the speed of German unification. Okay? So, first concrete assurances by Western leaders on NATO began on January 31st, 1990. And so I'm just going to summarize a little bit here. It is all here. I'm going to put the link to this released documents in the video. So description. You're going to be able to see it there if you want to. The point is this. Multiple leaders on multiple occasions, they didn't just say that they wouldn't extend NATO past Germany, okay? They literally said not an inch. So here's Berlin, and they literally said they weren't even going to include East Germany. Even after the country was unified, East Germany would not be included in NATO, meaning there would be no weapons facilities, there would be no military bases or anything like that associated with NATO built in East Germany. That was the point. So these were the assurances that Gorbachev was given in order to get him to tear down the Berlin Wall and to begin to dissolve the Soviet Union. Okay? And then in 1991, oh, that's not up here, but that's fine. In 1991, we have the Soviet Union being dissolved at the direction of Gorbachev. December 26th, day after Christmas, 1991, the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev steps down and vacates his position because it would no longer exist. And so his assumption there, his belief there is that we're going to honor what we've said in that process. And then America puts up kind of like their puppet in, was it Boris Yeltsin, I believe, that took over. I could tell you right here. Sorry. Yeah, Boris Yeltsin. So we put Boris Yeltsin in 91 or 92 and takes over Russia. And in 1994, actually, yeah, we're going to hold on a sec. I'm going to jump past that. 2004. Okay. Let's go here. Okay, so in 1994, there's the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances. And I should have had that up here. But once again, I'll have that link in the description. Hey, Life to the Max. Welcome. So in 1994, the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances, what that was is an agreement that was entered into between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. And the purpose of that was to denuclearize Ukraine. Ukraine actually, at the time of the Soviet Union being dissolved, Ukraine actually was the number 3 country in the world for nuclear weapons. They were the 3rd ranked in the world. And so the agreement was that Ukraine would send all their nuclear weapons, all their enriched uranium, everything, to Russia. Russia would pay them for the nuclear weapons, and the U.S. agreed to help destroy all of the nuclear facilities, everything to make more nuclear weapons, everything to fire them, all that kind of stuff. The U.S. was going to come into Ukraine and help destroy that, but it also included an agreement that both sides, the U.S. and Russia, would not invade Ukraine, but we would guarantee them peace. So that's a really big deal. That treaty is going to get called back upon because we Putin's going to get accused of violating that. In 2009, that was reinstated. It was up for expiration, and that treaty of the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances was taken up again and acknowledged that they would continue it at that time. So, all right, in 2004, let me see if I can find this. Oh, not 2004. 1999. Okay, yeah, this is a big deal. So in 1999, keep in mind that we've made assurances to the East, to the Soviets, that we will not expand NATO any further east, not 1 inch east of Berlin. And what happens is, in 1999, NATO, we add Poland. Here, I'm going to pull up the map for you guys one more time. In 1999, we added Poland, we added the Czech Republic, and we added Hungary. So here's Berlin right here. That's where we've promised not to move east of. We added Poland, we added the Czech Republic, and we added Hungary. Okay? That was in 1999. Now, in 1999, what's significant is Putin takes over in 1999. So we're going to go to this article right here. This article is actually called, Did We Provoke Putin's War in Ukraine? And this is from just a few days ago from Pat Buchanan. But he's got a section in here that I wanted to read to you guys. Gorbachev called off the Cold War in Europe by removing all of the causes on Moscow's side of the historic divide. Putin, a former KGB colonel, came to power in 1999 after the disastrous decade-long rule of Boris Yeltsin, who we propped up, by the way, who ran Russia into the ground. In that year, 1999, Putin watched as America conducted a 78-day bombing campaign on Serbia, the Balkan nation that had historically been a protectorate of Mother Russia. And that year, also, 3 former Warsaw Pact nations. So it wasn't just that we moved east of Berlin, but we literally took 3 Warsaw Pact nations that were from the Soviet Union, and we added them to NATO in the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland. They were brought into NATO. Okay? Against whom were these countries to be protected by U.S. arms and the NATO alliance? The question was fairly asked. So, and the point is, obviously, was going after Russia. All right? Now, 2004, here's the next big bump. 2004, this article I'm looking at right now is from November 25th, 2004. And we're just going to kind of scan it a little bit. Yeah, good old Pat Buchanan, I agree, life. With their websites and stickers, their pranks and slogans aimed at banishing widespread fear of a corrupt regime, the democracy guerrillas of the Ukraine Pora Youth movement have already notched up a famous victory, whatever the outcome of the dangerous standoff in Kiev. Now, keep in mind, this is from 2004. This is not a recent article. Okay, Ukraine, traditionally passive in its politics, has been mobilized by the young democracy activists and will never be the same again. But while the gains of the orange-bedeckered chestnut revolution are Ukraine's, the campaign is an American creation, a sophisticated and brilliantly conceived exercise in Western branding and mass marketing that in 4 countries in 4 years has been used to try to salvage rigged elections and toppled unsavory regimes. Funded and organized by the U.S. government, deploying U.S. consultancies, pollsters, diplomats, the 2 big American parties, and U.S. non-government organizations, the campaign was first used in Europe in Belgrade in 2000 to beat Slobodan Milosevic at the ballot box. You guys may recognize some of these as I go through. Like it might pique your interest. You'll be like, oh yeah, I remember Milosevic, right? These names will come back to your memory. This has been a long, ongoing campaign of our government to destabilize that region. Richard Miles, the U.S. ambassador in Belgrade, played a key role. And by last year, that's 2003, as U.S. ambassador at, I cannot pronounce this word, but it's the capital of Georgia, he repeated the trick in Georgia, coaching Mikhail Saakashvili, I guess, in how to bring down Edward Shevardnadze. 10 months after the success, hold on, Let me show you real quick on the map again. Georgia is right here, okay? So, here's Berlin, here's Russia, and here's Georgia. And we're trying to topple this regime right here and get them to be sympathetic to NATO and oppose Russia. Okay, so that's what we're doing at this time. 10 months after the success in Belgrade, the U.S. ambassador in Minsk, Mikhail Kozak, a veteran of similar operations in Central America, notably in Nicaragua, organized a near-identical campaign to try to defeat the Belarus hardman Alexander Lukashenko. Once again, Belarus. Any possible strategic reason why we want Belarus here? Minsk is right about in here. Moscow is somewhere over in here, by the way. So you got, this is all being undertaken in Minsk. Moscow's right about in here. All right. And, all right, let's see. That one failed. And the Belarus president declared, there will be no Karasnika in Belarus. I love that. He literally was like, you lose. Good day, sir. But experience gained in Serbia, Georgia, and Belarus has been invaluable in plotting to beat the regime of Leonid Kuchma in Kiev. The operation, engineering democracy through the ballot box and civil disobedience, is now so slick that the methods have matured into a template for winning other people's elections. In the center of Belgrade, there is a dingy office staffed by computer-literate youngsters who call themselves the Center for Nonviolent Resistance. If you want to know how to beat a regime that controls the mass media, the judges, the courts, the security apparatus, and the voting stations, the young Belgrade activists are for hire. They emerged from the anti-Milosevic student movement, Otpor, meaning resistance. The catchy single-word branding is important. In Georgia last year, the parallel student movement was Khmara. In Belarus, it was Zabur. In Ukraine, it is Pora, meaning high time. Otpor also had a potent, simple slogan that appeared everywhere in Serbia in 2000. The two words, Gotevje, meaning he's finished, a reference to Milosevic. A logo of a black and white clenched fist completed the masterful marketing. All right, so we're not going to read all the way through this, okay? But, all right, we'll just say this. I'll read this one right here. Officially, the U.S. government spent $41 million organizing and funding the year-long operation to get rid of Milosevic from October 1999 in Ukraine. October 1999. In Ukraine, the figure is said to be around 14 million. So just know this is your stolen tax dollars, your money, who is going crazy. So all of this is going around. This article is from The Guardian, okay? Back in November of 2004. All of this stuff in 2004. And all of the things, keep in mind, all of the things that were the Trump election was accused of, the United States government had been doing on foreign soil for years. For years. It had been over a decade at the very least, that we had been doing these same maneuvers, these same tricks to outrage people, okay, and to create these revolutions, okay? So that was in 2004. Now, we're doing all this craziness in 2004, and now keep that in mind while we look at the map again. Because in 2004, NATO adds Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Romania, and Bulgaria. So, you see this wall that has been created? These are all member nations right here in a row. And two of them, even though they were not part of the Warsaw Pact. They were part of the Soviet Union, and they were bordering country. They are bordering countries of Russia, Estonia and Latvia on the border. Okay, and trust me, if we could have performed the revolution we wanted in Belarus, we would have had Belarus joining as well. All right. Now, so we did all that. I'm trying to see where we fast forward to now. What do we have? Okay, I'm jumping ahead there. All right. So let's go back to this other article I was reading. So the question seemed to be answered fully in 2004 when Slovenia, Slovakia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Romania, and Bulgaria were admitted into NATO, a grouping that included 3 former republics of the USSR itself, as well as 3 more former Warsaw Pact nations. So, craziness. All right. Now, 2008 came the Bucharest Declaration that put Georgia and Ukraine, both bordering on Russia, on a path to NATO membership. All right. So, pulling the map back up, you have Ukraine, massive border in Ukraine with Russia. Okay. So, keep in mind, Moscow's right here. And then also we have Georgia. We're trying to, this is actually, shoot. Anyway, I didn't mean to close that out, but it's okay. So in 2008, and once again, I'm going to remind you guys one more time, I am going to put links in the description so you can click and find any of the articles that I used, any of the, there's links to documents that are declassified, there's links to YouTube videos, there's all kinds of good sources that you can go to verify all the stuff I'm telling you, okay? So in 2008, President Bush is in his last NATO summit, and he is pushing crazy hard, working overtime to try and get Ukraine and Georgia to be added to NATO. But one of the rules for NATO has an open door policy as far as anyone who wants to be in can be in as long as you meet a few requirements, which we might cover that later, but either way you can look it up. It's Googleable, the requirements to be in NATO. But one of the keys is you have to be unanimously voted on to join. And France and Germany are the holdouts. France and Germany understand that Ukraine and Georgia need to not be in. So they have historically been the two that have kept us from adding Ukraine and Georgia. Okay? Now, in 2009, NATO adds Croatia, which is right here, and adds Albania, and Albania is down here. Also, keep in mind, Greece is right here. Greece is already a member at that time. Not really important for us, but Northern Macedonia was added in 2020. And this right here, by the way, is Kosovo. If you remember all the drama in Kosovo, it's right there. So we have Albania was added, and Croatia was added in 2009. Then, now here's the big happening, if you will, was 2014, okay? We're going to cover quite a few things in 2014 because 2014 is when, here, let me jump over here. So 2014 is when we have the uprising in Kiev, and there is a U.S. and Soros-backed violent revolution that topples the Ukrainian government. In fact, let me see if I can pull up. Yeah, let me pull that up real quick. Give me 1 second here. Because There should be a good link for this, so I can show you. That's right here anyway. Okay. So we'll just go to that one. All right. This is actually a current article. It was written on the 28th of February this year, so it's not an old article, but there's admissions in this article that it's from the India Narrative that are just kind of interesting because it points to the fact that I am not wrong. Somebody argued with me online the other day about this, saying that I was a conspiracy theorist, saying that, that George Soros funded the revolution, that the U.S. funded the revolution. But the fact is, I can back that up with facts. So what happened was there was the Maidan Revolution, it was called, in 2014. And during that revolution, the U.S. managed to topple the elected government of Viktor Yanukovych. And I'm not going to say that again. He actually fled the country for his life, and there was there were people coming after him, trying to kill him. The regime change at that time was, and I'm going to say things that sound like I'm being hyperbolic, and I promise I'm not being hyperbolic. So the U.S. and George Soros used Nazi sympathizers, not Nazis the way Democrats talk about Nazis, but actual Nazis, people who support Nazism, actual racist, actual supremacist, and people who support the ethnic cleansing and things of that nature, teamed up with actual Nazis to help overthrow the democratically elected government because Yanukovych, I said I wasn't going to say it again, but Yanukovych was friendly to the Russians. He supported the Russians, but that was because he was democratically elected, and much of Ukrainians saw themselves as Russian. So in 2014, they have this revolution happen. In February that year, there was this insane attack. So there were protests in Kiev. Here, let me pull up the map real quick, so you get a view of what I'm talking about. So Kiev, man, I wish I didn't plan on this, but let me go ahead and see if I can pull up a better map of Ukraine, just because I want you to see maps. There we go. I want you to see what happened here, okay? So, get rid of that. Get rid of that. Okay. And we'll switch off of here. So, there we go. All right, so here's Kiev. All right. This is the capital, and this is where the protests were happening. We're in Kiev, and down here is Odessa, okay? And here is the Crimean Peninsula, okay? Crimean Peninsula is down here, and historically, the Crimean Peninsula has been controlled by the Russians and have considered themselves part of the Russian Federation. They are mostly Russian-speaking. They even have a military base that belongs to Russia that basically they were agreeing to lease. It's this right here, Sevastopol. That is actually where the Russian naval base was. And they had an agreement with Russia that they could use that. And what was happening is with the toppling of Ukraine in Kiev, there were rumors that they were going to get rid of the ability for Russia to use this military base. So there were about 400 actually peaceful protesters who went from the Crimean Peninsula to Kiev to protest. And while they were in Kiev, they got attacked with, they had fireworks thrown in, they had grenades thrown in. I actually have a video. I'll include the link to this video in this description. I don't want to show the video because there's literally people that are dead in the video. It's pretty horrific. There's people having CPR done to them, and they're not coming back. And it's really bad. But you can watch the video if you want, and it's people giving first account testimony of what happened to them on that day in February. And what did happen was that they had several buses that were returning from Kiev going down to the Crimean Peninsula. And when they got to Odessa, they blocked off the bridge. They blocked off the road with logs, with tires, whatever they could do to block the road. They started setting fire to these buses while people were still in them. And you're talking about men, women, children, all ages, just lighting the buses on fire and keeping them trapped in, then finally letting them out. They were tortured. They were beaten with baseball bats. They were beaten with homemade maces that they made. There were people shot. There were people killed that day, and there were some people reportedly like buried alive in the ditches, like they had equipment that buried them alive. There's a report of one guy who they forced him to kneel down and sing the national anthem of Ukraine. He said, "Long live Russia," and they cut his throat right there on the side of the road. It was absolutely crazy. This forcing them to sing the Ukrainian national anthem. If they didn't know the words, they would be beaten even worse. They ended up burning all of the buses that they had traveled on that day. All this is going down in February. It's an absolute nightmare. And then what happened was at the end of February, we see the annexation of Crimea. So Putin knows that Crimea is it's Russian, right? So this area right here, it's Russian. The people speak Russian. They identify as Russian, and they're being attacked. They're being attacked because they aren't identifying with Ukraine, but instead are identifying with Russia. Okay? And then, so Putin sweeps in, and he takes over the area. And they hold a vote, and it was called the Crimean Status Referendum. and they had 83% voter turnout, and 97% of the people voted in favor of integration into the Russian Federation. And so in March, Putin completely annexes Crimea. By March 18th, he declares that it's his. According to the Russian Foreign Ministry, this is kind of interesting because so when that happened, the U.S. obviously was saying, well, you're violating our treaty that we had made. If you remember back in 1994, they had the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances. And so, of course, the U.S., even though we violated everything we ever said to Mikhail Gorbachev in 1990 through 1991, we violated everything we said and went back on our word. But we're very quick to point out to Putin that he's violating the word of Boris Yeltsin in 1994. And what the Russian Foreign Ministry said in response was the security assurances were given to the legitimate government of Ukraine, but not to the forces that came to power following the coup d'etat. So, say what you want about Putin. Personally, I don't think he's a good man. I think he's made some very immoral decisions. He's done some evil things. But if nothing else, he has demonstrated that he is true to what he says he will do. And you can't fault the logic in what he's saying, that he made an agreement with the legitimate government, and this is clearly not the legitimate government. All right, now, for those who might say that there's not enough proof, we're going to look right here. So, in a blog posting, Soros, known for his backing of color revolutions and running his controversial network of open society institutes, praised Ukrainians for bravely standing on the front line and risking their lives against the Russian onslaught. Now, that's just currently. That's what he's doing right now. Now, Soros, incidentally, right, was a key supporter of the 2014 Maidan Square revolution in Ukraine, which toppled the elected government. Following the regime change in Ukraine, Russia annexed Crimea, which not only had a majority ethnic Russian population, but more importantly, Sevastopol, the Russian naval base that provided critical access to the Black Sea. With a hostile pro-Western government implanted in Ukraine, a pivotal state, it was plain to Moscow that a militarized Kiev would pose a serious security threat to its western flank. Without referring to the bigger and deeper geopolitical tussle over Ukraine between Russia and the West, Soros wrote in his blog in 2014 that in order for Ukrainians to realize that future, the spirit of the Maidan must be preserved. They will need international support, and my foundation is working with experts in Ukraine to create a strategy for keeping the spirit of the Maidan alive. Okay? So Soros clearly takes credit, at the very least, for quote-unquote supporting what happened in 2014. All right? Additionally, we know that the U.S. helped control this thanks to a leaked phone conversation. And I'm going to go ahead and play this conversation. Give me 1 second. So this is the article I'm reading from, which is from the BBC, and it is from February 7th, 2014. And we're going to listen to a bugged phone conversation from them. And I will warn you that there is cursing in this phone conversation, and this is language that I would never use, but it's in this conversation, and it seemed like it was going to be too hard for me to edit out. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave it. And here is their conversation.
What do you think?
I think we're in play. The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now. So we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Cleach should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yachts is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Cleach and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week. I just think Cleach going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay. Good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
My understanding from that call, but you tell me, was that the big three were going into their own meeting, and that Yachts was going to offer in that context a three-way, the 3+1 conversation or 3+2 with you. Is that not how you understood it?
No, I mean, that's what he proposed, but I think just knowing the dynamic that's been with them where Klitschko has been the top dog, he's going to take a while to show up for whatever meeting they've got, and he's probably talking to his guys at this point. So I think you reaching out directly to him helps with the personality management among the three, and it gives you also a chance to move fast on all this stuff and put us behind it before they all sit down and he explains why he doesn't like it.
Okay, good. I'm happy. Why don't you reach out to him and see if he wants to talk before or after?
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Okay, I've now written, one more wrinkle for you, Jeff.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I told you this or if I only told Washington this, that when I talked to Jeff Feltman this morning, he had a new name for the UN guy, Robert Seri. Did I write you that this morning?
Yeah,
okay.
I saw that.
He's now gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Seri could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, fuck the EU.
No, exactly. And I think we've got to do something to make it stick together, because you can be pretty sure that if it does start to gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind the scenes to try to torpedo it. And again, the fact that this is out there right now, I'm still trying to figure out in my mind why Yanukovych did that. But in the meantime, there's a Party of Regions faction meeting going on right now, and I'm sure there's a lively argument going on in that group at this point. But anyway, we could land jelly set up on this one if we move fast. So let me work on Klitschko, and if you can just keep, I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So
okay.
Biden's willing.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, I don't want to get in trouble for the Sex Pistols playing, so I don't need to get gigged for that. It won't be worth it. All right, so we're gonna cover that phone call real quick, just so you understand the players that were involved there. So, an apparently bugged phone conversation in which a senior U.S. diplomat disparages the EU over the Ukraine crisis has been posted online. The alleged conversation, between Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt, appeared on YouTube on Thursday. It is not clear when the alleged conversation took place. So, this is just... we already listened to their conversation, so I'm just going to cover the observations made in this article about the conversation. So we're going to have a conversation about the conversation. And it says, at the outset, it should be clear that this is a fragment of what may well be a larger phone conversation. But the U.S. has not denied its veracity and has been quick to point a finger at the Russian authorities for being behind its interception and leak. So, something... Oh, you didn't understand the convo? I'm sorry. So we'll kind of sum it up here. But keep in mind that this is an old trick here that they're saying, it's the Russian authorities that intercepted this and leaked it, right? Who cares? This is the same thing back with during the 2016 election, where the Hillary campaign kept talking about the source of the WikiLeaks, that it was some kind of a Russian leak or something like that, getting into the DNC's computers and all this. Never once did they say, it wasn't true, that CNN didn't give Hillary advance notice of the questions, that the DNC and Hillary didn't work together to make sure Bernie didn't have a chance to get nominated. They never attacked that it was actually happening. They never attacked that, or they never denied that they were involved in the corruption. Instead, they were just like, the source was a hack, and it was Russia, and it's all this. Same thing happened when the Hunter Biden laptop was leaked. Whenever it came out, instead of talking about the fact that it was actually his laptop, that it was verified, and that there's incredibly incriminating evidence might be on it, what did they do? They focused on the source of it. How did they get their hands on it? Where did it come from? Was it illegally obtained or whatever? And at the end of the day, who cares? We should be able to know the corruption that's happening. And so that's kind of what is being pointed out in this article, is that the U.S. never denied that the phone call that we just listened to took place and that it was real. They only attacked that it was an intercepted call from Russia, and so I guess we shouldn't listen to it then. All right. So this says, I think we're in play, and this is Pyatt who said that. And Jeffrey Pyatt is the ambassador to Ukraine. He is the person who communicates for the U.S. government to Ukraine on a regular basis. And he said, I think we're in play. And he's talking about Vitaly Klitschko, which was one of the main opposition leaders in Ukraine, saying that the Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, saying they got to get Klitschko on board and have him supporting them in order for it to work. All right? And they're trying to announce him as the deputy prime minister. So all of this is just under the radar, behind the scenes, trying to orchestrate a coup to prop up an illegal, corrupt government. All right. So this is, the U.S. says that it is working with all sides in the crisis to reach a peaceful solution, noting that, quote, ultimately it is up to the Ukrainian people to decide their future, end quote. However, This transcript suggests that the U.S. has very clear ideas about what the outcome should be and is striving to achieve these goals. The Russian spokesmen have insisted that the U.S. is meddling in Ukraine's affairs, no more than Moscow, the cynic might say, but Washington clearly has its own game plan. The clear purpose in leaking this conversation is to embarrass Washington and for audience susceptible to Moscow's message to portray the U.S. as interfering in Ukraine's domestic affairs. See, this is the same old trick too, and a lot of normal people fall for this. If I go online and I say it, all I would have to do is say something on Twitter like, I'm not pro Putin, I'm not pro Zelensky, I'm pro the Russian people, and I'm pro the Ukrainian people, and I hope they work this out without loss of life or something. Even something like that, people are like, oh, yeah, right, you're not pro Putin, you're opposed to us going to war. If I just say, I hope they work it out, I don't want U.S. to get involved. Like, oh, this is Russian propaganda. Like, even something mild like that, they're going to accuse you of being like, a Russia apologist or something. And I simply don't care about those accusations. They don't bother me because I don't care, because I consider the source, and the reality is the source is just kind of dumb. So, that's what he's saying is going to happen here. It doesn't matter who leaked that conversation. Jump down here. So, an intriguing insight into the foreign policy process with work going on at a number of levels, various officials attempting to marshal the Ukrainian opposition, efforts to get the UN to play an active role in bolstering a deal. And as you can see below, the big guns waiting in the wings. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden clearly being lined up to give private words of encouragement at the appropriate moment, right? So the ambassador says, yeah, I saw that. And then Newland says, okay, he's gotten both Sari and the UN General Secretary to agree that Sari should come in Monday or Tuesday. So they're just screwing with this all the way through. They're completely working everything through, and they're even saying, like Newland here says, so on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, U.S. Vice President's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan's come back to me saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So Biden's willing. Okay, so literally Biden is in on this entire thing. It goes all the way to the White House that they were orchestrating the regime change in Ukraine. And keep in mind that this regime change went from a good person who was not at odds with Putin and supported the country of Ukraine, and who took over the country were literal Nazis. Literal Nazis who, if you could speak Russian, they would brutally beat you or kill you. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. Yeah, Life, sorry about there's just so many names. It is hard to keep up with. I'll tell you this. I'm doing this crazy overview where I'm not getting into a bunch of names. If you listen to Scott Horton gave a talk in Utah in February. I want to say the 22nd maybe of February. I'm not sure. And he handles all the years from 91 to 99 and lays out all of the diplomats and people who served in the U.S. government who helped bring this about too, and people that I'm not even getting into at all. And you might get lost in that, but man, it's just there is so much. There's so many levels to this craziness. All right, so all of that to say that without any doubt in my mind, I can tell you that George Soros and the United States government staged the coup in 2014 that overthrew the elected president of Ukraine, and they, in order to put a president in place who was pro-NATO and anti-Russia and anti-Putin. Okay? Here's something else that I find interesting. Let's see here. All right, this is an article from The Hill.
Well, a lot of times Americans always want to know, how is our
We're not going to listen to this nonsense. It's an article from The Hill. So there's a whole interview here where they cover a bunch of stuff. I just care about a few little pieces of information. So in the 2016 election, and see, these are the things, when I bring these up, you guys may sit here and go, oh yeah, I kind of remember that. And I just want to give context so you can understand why these things were happening. So this article, which is, it's from March 26th, 2019, all right? It says, the U.S. Embassy pressed Ukraine to drop probe of George Soros group during 2016 election. So, for the purposes of the election, so that they could make sure the person who was backing Hillary Clinton, George Soros, did not get any negative attention, we put pressure on them. All right? So, I'll read from this article a little bit. While the 2016 presidential race was raging in America, Ukrainian prosecutors ran into some unexpectedly strong headwinds as they pursued an investigation into the activities of a nonprofit in their homeland known as the Anti-Corruption Action Center. All right? Now, ANTAC was they were part of the ones who participated in overthrowing the government in Kiev, okay? So these prosecutors soon would learn the resistance they faced was blowing directly from the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, where the Obama administration took the rare step of trying to press the Ukrainian government to back off its investigation of both the U.S. aid and the group. Okay, so where the money was coming from and who the group was, they wanted them to back off. It's very interesting is just earlier today, I was in a conversation with somebody on Instagram, and they told me that I was being ridiculous, that the U.S., all the time, the U.S. tells other governments to stop investigating our citizens, that we'll handle it. This is not true. This is very simply not true. A normal U.S. citizen who goes overseas and commits a crime, the majority of the time, the U.S. government is not going to intervene. They're going to allow the justice system in that government to take its course. But here in 2016, we're putting pressure on them directly from our embassy to halt this investigation, okay? Let's see. I'm scrolling down here because we don't need to read everything. But the guy being interviewed right here is named Lutsenko. And he's the prosecutor general in Ukraine. And it says, Lutsenko told me he was stunned when the ambassador, quote, gave me a list of people whom we could not prosecute, end quote. And the list included a founder of the ANTAC group and 2 members of parliament who vocally supported the group's anti-corruption reform agenda, according to a source directly familiar with the meeting. All right? So it turns out the group that Ukrainian law enforcement was probing was co-funded by the Obama administration. I'm going to read that again. It turns out the group that Ukrainian law enforcement was probing was co-funded by the Obama administration and liberal mega donor George Soros. and it was collaborating with the FBI agents investigating then Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort's business activities with pro-Russian figures in Ukraine. All right? So literally, this is the Obama administration coming out and saying you cannot investigate this guy who is financially backing our Democratic nominee for president. All right? So that's what happened in 2016. Now, 2016, Donald Trump gets elected. Donald Trump has taken a position of wanting peace with Russia, of not wanting to pursue military action against Russia, not wanting to pursue war at all. He's, whether you support him or not, at the very least, the rhetoric was good on war, that he did not feel we should be in military conflicts if we could avoid them. So he's elected 2016, and in 2017, two Republican congressmen go to Ukraine, and they are speaking to Ukrainian military members. And give me 1 second, and I'm going to set it up because we're going to watch this. That's not what I wanted. All right. So I queued this video up, and we're going to watch as John McCain and Lindsey Graham are speaking with the Ukrainian military, and this is in 2017, okay? This is in 2017 that this happens. So this is after Trump is in office, and this is what they say, and I'll explain afterwards the Cliff Notes version of it and why it's important.
I admire the fact that you will fight for your homeland.
Я захоплююсь тим, що ви боретеся за свою батьківщину.
Your fight is our fight.
Ваша боротьба – це наша боротьба.
2017 will be the year of offense.
Рік 2017 рік буде ріком нападу.
All of us will go back to Washington and we will push the case against Russia.
Ми всі повернемося до Вашингтону і ми будемо відстоювати санкції проти Росії.
Enough of a Russian aggression.
Досить вже російської агресії.
It is time for them to pay a heavier price.
Час вже щоб вони заплатили важчу ціну.
Our fight is not with the Russian people but with Putin.
Ми боремося не з російським народом, але з Путіним.
Our promise to you is to take your cause to Washington.
Наша обіцянка – це те, що ми вашу боротьбу доведемо до Вашингтона.
Inform the American people of your bravery.
Проінформуємо американський народ про вашу відважність.
And make the case against Putin to the world.
І покажемо про докази проти Путіна усьому світу.
I believe you will win. I am convinced you will win, and we will do everything we can to provide you with what you need to win.
Я вірю в те, що ви виграєте, переможете. Я переконаний в тому, що ви переможете, і ми вам допоможемо всіма можливими засобами.
We have succeeded not because of equipment, but
All right, that's good enough. That's good enough. Oh, he's so hard to listen to. All right. Unfortunately, that video is pretty quiet. I am going to clip part of that later and throw it up on my Instagram, because there's just part of that video that that kind of cracks me up, as evil as it is. So what you will see in that video was Lindsey Graham stating, "Your fight is our fight. 2017 will be the year of offense. All of us will go back to Washington, and we will push the case against Russia. Enough of a Russian aggression. It is time for them to pay a heavier price." So these are clearly fighting words. These are clearly fighting words. And what they are saying is, we're going to go back to Trump, and we're going to push the case against Russia. We're going to convince the new president that we need to go to war We need to support Ukraine in war. We need to fight against Russia. These are the warmongers. These are the warmongers. And this is John McCain. He goes, I believe you will win. I am convinced you will win. And we will do everything we can to provide you with what you need to win. Ugh. Good riddance. Good riddance. All right. And what's crazy is, see, this is why Donald Trump tweeted, January 29, 2017, Donald Trump tweets, senators should focus their energies on ISIS, illegal immigration, and border security instead of always looking to start World War III. Right? Right? Exactly. It is absolutely crazy. All right. So that happened in 2017. And 2017 is when, not that this is that important, but we're going to
Because of your courage.
get out of there. And I can show you where that is real quick. Montenegro is a very small country down here. Okay, Montenegro. They were added in 2017. But I've set it up for you so far through 2017. It is no wonder that Russia sees us as being aggressive. Yep. Now, here's where I'm going to get a little bit conspiratorial, but I really think I'm right here, okay? So this is see, FP, and this article is from, I do not see a date. Okay, November 15th, 2019. This is when this article was written. And this article is not written from the perspective that I'm going to talk about. But this article is definitely written from a liberal perspective. Trump resisted sale of javelins to Ukraine. Republicans are defending him in the impeachment inquiry by saying he gave more military aid than his predecessor, but it came only after the reluctant president was convinced it would be good for U.S. business. All right, so we don't have to go into great detail about this. I think everyone remembers the quote-unquote perfect phone call that Trump had with Ukraine, where he was trying to get them to investigate Hunter Biden, and all the drama involving that, right, in exchange for this weapons deal. But here's what's crazy, okay? So what we have is Donald Trump, who wants peace with Russia. So what do? They try to convince everyone that he's a Russian asset, that Russia helped get him elected. And so that, because they're doing that initially to try to keep him from getting elected, so that the war hawk Hillary Clinton can get into office, and they can continue with their plans fighting against Russia. But it doesn't work. Americans elect Donald Trump in spite of the allegations against him that he colluded with Russia in order to get elected, okay? But what it did is it kind of boxed him into a corner where he constantly had to appear like he was not a Putin puppet, as they would call him. And so he would constantly be forced into positions where he would have to take a stance against Russia, or for Ukraine in this case, in order to appear that he was not a Russian ally, so to speak. All right? And what's really crazy about this is, with everything that Obama did, all the upheaval that Obama caused in Ukraine, through in 2014, the coup, all the craziness that he was part of, he didn't send weapons to Ukraine, okay? He didn't do it because he knew that was an act of aggression. and that it would likely come back with a military response from Putin. And what do? This is where I'm like, Trump is not playing 4D chess. He is not the most brilliant guy. I trust Trump's instincts. I trust that he can read a room well. I trust his comedic timing. I think that he will almost always say what he thinks, which is nice to hear from a politician. But at the end of the day, when it comes to foreign policy, Donald Trump is clueless. If he wasn't clueless, he would have just said, no, I'm not selling weapons to Ukraine, because that would be an act of aggression against Russia and would violate any attempt at peace that we want. But instead, they threaten to impeach him, and actually do impeach him, over the whole process of him delaying selling these weapons to Ukraine that he shouldn't have been trying to sell to Ukraine in the first place. So it's absolutely nuts how they kind of box him into this corner, and they still get him to sell weapons to Ukraine, which is insane. He should never have done it. We shouldn't be providing Ukraine with weapons. And then they still impeach him in the process of it. So it was a win-win for them all around, the Democrats, well, the establishment in general, because as we just saw, John McCain and Lindsey Graham and all the other war hawks, neocons, fake Republicans, loved that he sold those weapons to Ukraine. It absolutely furthered what they wanted to happen, okay? All right. Moving on, and we are almost done. I promise we are almost done. So that's 2019, and we're going to fast forward up to 2022, okay? And this is where we've already laid all the groundwork. We've already laid all the groundwork for why Russia would feel like it's being aggressed upon. Why Russia would feel like, for sure, they are, at the very least, being plotted against, that people are preparing for military action against them, okay? Because numerous treaties being broken, numerous lines being crossed, and, thanks to WikiLeaks, we actually have documents where the ambassadors knew for a fact the Niet means Niet line, where basically Ukraine, Kiev was that red line that everyone pretty much knew you cannot cross this red line or you're going to invoke Putin. You're going to put him in a position where he's backed into a corner. So, all right. Now, this article right here is from last month, and it says, why is Ukraine not in NATO, and is it too late to join? Here's what experts and NATO say. Now, this article is written by a moron. As far as their position, their position is, come on, let's get him in NATO. Let's hurry up and get him in NATO. Isn't this the best thing, right? Because that's what they want. They want you to fall for the propaganda and think that we should be part of it. But the gist of it is this, that the requirements to become a NATO member, I said we might cover this later, and we will real quick here. NATO says it has an open-door policy for members to join any European country in a position to further the principles of the Washington Treaty and contribute to security in the Euro-Atlantic area can become a member of the alliance at the invitation of the North Atlantic Council, and NATO says on their website. NATO's line has always been the door to membership to NATO is open to any state that chooses that it wants to join NATO. If it makes that choice independently, then there is a process and criteria to follow. All right, and the main thing is they have to be an established democracy, and they have to be able to contribute economically and militarily to NATO in order to be considered. And then they have to be unanimously inducted. Here it is right here. It says 1995, the alliance published requirements. A functioning democratic political system based on a market economy, the fair treatment of minority populations, a commitment to the peaceful resolution of conflicts, the ability and willingness to make a military contribution to NATO operations, and a commitment to democratic civil military relations and institutional structures. So a whole bunch of extra words to just basically say what I already told you. They just got to be reasonable. They got to treat people well, a little bit of civil rights, and the main thing is they have to have a functioning democratic political system, because once again, we in the West really adore democracy. I swear you could say that we believe democracy is next to godliness. It's really insane at this point. So the basic point is that it is Ukraine's choice. Now, in practical terms, and this is key right here for Putin's logic, okay? Absorbing a nation with a simmering conflict with unresolved territorial disputes would obviously be difficult for NATO, because NATO then absorbs that conflict. And then there's this line right here, which is kind of interesting. And this is very true if you think about it. This guy is just an expert of foreign policy here. And he said the feeling was, and probably still has been, that Ukraine hasn't completely taken care of political corruption, and that it's still developing its democracy. So it's kind of funny right there. So on one hand, it's unlikely that we're going to get, the U.S. is going to get NATO, it's unlikely that the U.S. is going to get Ukraine into NATO because of the upheaval that we caused in its democratic system. And then at the same time, it's unlikely that they're going to be adopted into NATO because of what Putin is doing in causing territorial and military conflict within the borders of Ukraine. And I'll expound on that in just a second. Yeah. All right. I do have links to a lot of stuff here. But one thing I'll tell you that's frustrating, this article is really good, from Dave DeCamp, and he basically is just talking about the fact that we're basically refusing any diplomacy. As far as from the United States perspective, we have not engaged in any diplomatic relations between Russia and Ukraine. We pretty much are just leaving it to them. And I think, honestly, we hope that Ukraine wins. But honestly, I don't know that they care, because either way they'll have a reason to either adopt Ukraine into NATO or begin a military conflict against Russia. One way or the other. It doesn't really matter. So that was that article right there. I recommend that one. It'll be in the description. Real quick, I'll show you this too. This is from the NATO website. And this should, see here, yeah, here's Minsk right here, where my little hand is, and Moscow's right here. Kiev's right here. So you can understand why us having weaponry this close to Moscow would definitely worry Putin, right? Let me click this link right here, and I'll show you the map's going to change. This is just a neutral map. I'm going to click on the NATO members. So this is the current NATO members. These are people who oppose Russia and oppose the old Soviet Union, okay? I mean, they are just straight up surrounded. Straight up surrounded. And we're trying to add Ukraine and Georgia here, okay? So it's absolutely nuts, okay? Now, I do want to read a little bit from this article, and then I'll read through a little bit of the chatting, and we'll wrap it up. So this is by by Rick Sterling. This is a great article right here by Rick Sterling called How the U.S. Instigated the Ukraine Crisis. This was written on the 25th of February. So this is one day after the quote-unquote war started. Russia has sent troops into Ukraine and attacked Ukrainian military forces. And this is right here, this is huge. In a 1-hour address, President Putin said the goal was the denazification of Ukraine. The denazification. Now, he could be lying about that's actually his intended goal, but I promise you, there's a crazy amount of Nazis in Western Ukraine. It's really bad. It is very bad. It is now clear the Russian statements and proposed peace treaty in December 2021 were deadly serious. At that time, the Russians said the U.S. and NATO were, quote, crossing red lines. Okay? And we know this to be true. They felt threatened and would not abide this endlessly, and now they have taken action. In his address yesterday, Russian President Putin gave a frank explanation which comes after years of complaints. I want you to listen to this part very clearly, because we could literally end all the conflict. The United States holds all the marbles. We could end this conflict today if we wanted to. The Russians have complained bitterly about the U.S. promoted 2014 coup in Ukraine, the eastward expansion of NATO, the installation of missiles in Romania and Poland, and the pretense that the missiles were for defense against Iran, the 2019 U.S. withdrawal from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement. Okay, look at this now. That was that INF agreement I told you about earlier. In 2019, we withdrew from that agreement. The aggression against Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the East. Okay, so, and that's all we're going to read from this article. What he's saying, he's literally calling out a whole bunch of the stuff that I addressed already. But in addition to that, he's also saying we backed out of our treaty with them that we weren't going to use middle or intermediate nuclear weapons against them. We withdrew from that. Why in the world would we do that? That's absolutely crazy. But all we would have to do to end this war, and I can't guarantee it because who knows the way everybody else thinks, but I almost guarantee you, if we promised, if we put it in writing, that NATO would not invite Ukraine in, and if we removed our missiles from Romania and Poland, and let me show you the map one more time. He's asking us to remove missiles from here and here. Now, we put missiles here and here, claiming that it was about this guy right down here, Iran. That's what we said. Hey, we need missiles here and here to get to here. Which makes no sense because Iraq's right over here, and we already have locations available there. But we tried to say that we need missiles here and here in order to reach Iran, when clearly it's to reach Russia. Okay? So if we removed our missiles from Poland and Romania, and if we told Ukraine, no, Ukraine and Georgia, you guys are not coming in, we give Putin our word that we're not going to do that, it would end this whole thing. I almost 100% guarantee it would end this whole thing right now. But we don't want a resolution. We actually want the aggression. We want it to continue, unfortunately. That's actually the situation we're in right now. And it's a real shame. So, all right. That's it. That's it. That's the deal. Let me get back to this one right here. All right. Let me go ahead and read through some of this chat. Thanks. Might be Shapiro. Okay, please don't call me Shapiro. Yep, definitely showed us meddling. It's crazy how involved we get in other. So that's one of the things that once you start reading this stuff and you see just how much the United States meddles in other countries' elections, from propaganda to literally propping up. They do the same thing in other countries that we do in our country. So in our country, historically, they put up two people that they don't care who wins, Democrat and Republican. And the establishment puts up those two opponents, and they don't care who wins. They pretend like it's the end of the world if the other one's going to win. But the truth is they don't care. George W. Bush was barely any different from the clown who ran against him, and my brain's not going to work. The guy who's been so crazy about climate change, and my brain's not going to work today. He's from Tennessee. Anyway, the hanging Chad election. Like they really cared whether George W. Bush won or not. They didn't care. They would have gotten their people in no matter what. Okay? No, not Kerry. It was now I'm going to have to remember. It was Bill Clinton's vice president, Al Gore. There you go, Al Gore. Yep, they didn't care whether Gore or Bush won because Gore and Bush are basically the same people. They're basically the same people. They've got rhetoric that's different, but when it comes to war and foreign policy, which is the most important thing that the president does, they are the same people, and they were promoted the same conflicts that the military-industrial complex wanted them to pursue. So 2016 threw a major wrench in the works, and basically Trump kind of took a page out of their book with using the social media and the groundswell. And honestly, if the Democratic Party hadn't rigged their primary, you would have seen Donald Trump versus the Jew from Vermont, Bernie Sanders. You would have seen Sanders versus Trump, but using the superdelegates in order to manipulate their primary, the Democrats were able to get Hillary nominated even though she wasn't their most popular candidate. And then Trump, man, the Republicans did everything they could to try to keep Trump from winning that nomination. I promise you, the establishment politicians on both sides wanted Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton to face off. And Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton would have basically had the same advisors. They would have had the same George W. Bush advisors, regardless of who won. Okay? And so the fact that Trump won threw a wrench in the works. But all of the Russia collusion nonsense pushed him into a corner where he ended up appointing basically a George W. Bush cabinet himself. By the time it was all said and done, they pushed him into a spot where he, they got Paul Manafort out of there. They got who's the Breitbart guy? Anyway, names. For some reason I'm not good with names at the moment, but regardless, they did everything they could to try and eliminate anybody he put into a position of power that wasn't going to do what the establishment wanted to do, because they want war, because war is about money. War is about money. And so this whole conflict in Ukraine, yeah, Bannon, exactly. So it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy that we fall into this trap. I hope people are starting to wake up to it, but I'll tell you this. I post a couple things online, a couple things on like Instagram and whatnot, just to push the narrative the other way, even to the slightest. And the amount of pushback you get that are seriously like, oh, how much is the Kremlin paying you in order to say this? And it's like, man, I'm telling you right now, if you are watching CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, if you're watching any of these mainstream media outlets, you are getting fed a narrative that is just not reality. And this isn't conspiracy theory stuff. I literally am going to have links in the description, and you can go and you can look. I've got the documents. I've got the documents. And you can see for yourself that it's very clear that while Vladimir Putin is fully responsible for every action he takes, and I do not support the actions he has taken, it is very clear that the actions he has taken are logical. And you can understand why he would take them. Because if instead of being Russia, it was America, okay? And instead of being Ukraine and Georgia and Belarus and Poland, Romania, it was Canada and Mexico and Cuba, right? Where our enemy was trying to join an alliance and put weapons there and put military bases there, we would absolutely react the same way that Putin has. We would 100% we would invade. We would invade Mexico right now if they partnered up with Russia and put weapons and military forces along our border. We absolutely would do it. So, all right. Hopefully, you guys are slightly more informed. Hopefully, I wasn't too boring, and we'll try and do another one of these before too long. We might not do it about something as serious. I've been thinking maybe I'll do maybe like some book reviews and stuff, because I really like. I enjoy reading. And I enjoy consuming information in large quantities, and I know not everybody does, so maybe if I can break stuff down and give people a synopsis of the things that I consume, maybe they would enjoy that. So that's what I'm hoping for. The documents, exactly. I have the documents, and I do want you to imagine if the roles were reversed. 100%. Yeah. So... all right, we're going to get out of here, and I want you to hang tight because I want you to watch this ending video and enjoy this music, because this music in this video was made, like, I would say about a year ago, and I'm just now getting to use it, and much thanks to my good friend Stephen Ignoramus for writing and recording this music for my outro. See you guys.